Hey, everybody. With me here today is Pam Cail, who's the Vice President of HYC Logistics. Hopefully I got that title there correct, Pam. And
Yes, you did.
all right, good deal. So Pam is going to tell us a little bit about when to pick air shipping versus sea shipping. So if you have been doing air shipping and you're thinking about maybe doing a sea shipment, Pam is a great resource. She's been doing this for, I believe, 34-ish years. Did I get
That's
that right?
right. I
And
started when I was 2.
right. She's 28, so
Yeah.
the math is a little different there. But yes, but Pam is a huge wealth of knowledge. I've actually gotten the chance to meet Pam twice now, and actually I've only done one sea shipment in my importing career, and I used HYC Logistics. And the way I found out about you guys the first time was actually when you were on My Wife Quit Her Job podcast, Steve Chu's podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And we've met twice now, actually, at Steve Chu's Seller Summit event. And you did presentations both times, and I think it was super helpful. So I asked Pam to join us here on Maximizing E-commerce, just to talk a little bit about the logistics involved of going from air shipping to sea shipping, when to know when it makes sense to do air shipping. And she also put together this chart, which I will link to down below, which I think is super helpful. So it goes through basically the process in a pretty simplistic manner of what it takes to do sea shipping. So, all right, well, let's go ahead and get into this. So I think just to start off, tell me, Pam, when does it make sense to do air shipping?
I believe it makes sense when you have enough cubic meters. That means the kilos is for air freight, cubic meters is for ocean freight. So you've got
Okay.
to know both in order for you to make a smart decision. But I believe when you get the cubic meters to 3 or 4 cubic meters, which is CBMs in short term, and then also the other choice is when your carton count becomes so large that you end up spending more money for the air freight due to your dimensional weight. And let's go back just a minute when I'm talking air freight versus ocean. Don't forget that air freight is always has a cost base on chargeable weight. So you may get something from your supplier that says you've got 80 kilos, but in actuality, it will dim out and go into chargeable weight to 215. So then the price is astronomical. So then you would want to look for an option of ocean freight as well. So those are always the things we look at. When we help somebody, we look at it. If they ask for air, we always look at the cartons and the chargeable weight, and then we may suggest if they're in a bind and they need to do something in a hurry. Okay, how about send 10 cartons, quickly by air, but then send the rest by sea, because then it makes sense too. So the thought process makes you really become a smart importer, and also broadens your mind into saying, okay, I have options now. Also with you being part of the community with sellers, you may have 4 or 5 friends that you all can make your own container together. So don't do the air freight if you've got time. Go ahead and you and a group of people make your own container, and then end up being with somebody like HYC or somebody just as well versed in U.S. Customs regulations and documents, so that all of your friends and you have proper documents, and you can get your own solid container that's not stopped by U.S. Customs for an exam for something that could have been avoided. Now, you do have exams with everything, really. But most of the containers do get a question on, oh, my container got examined, blah, blah, blah. That is going to happen. But you also have exams with air freight. You just don't hear about it as much because there's so much more ocean freight out there than air freight. So say you have an exam, and I talked to you about these 4 or 5 people that you know and have good documentation. You consolidate and you take your 3 or 4 CBMs, they take their 5 or 6 or their 10 or their 4. You consolidate and make an ocean shipment. This will help you on your cost as well, because you're going to divide out your pricing of that full container based on what your CBMs are in the container. Now, say you do this same thing with 4 or 5 strangers that you don't know who they're using for customs clearance. You don't know if their documents were actually looked at to see if they were proper, if they had the information of origin, and what some of the things that U.S. Customs needs in order to even do the preliminary processing. So when you sometimes roll the dice with doing an LCL, less than container shipment, with a group of people that you don't know, they may stop the container and they may force an exam because of lack of documents, bad product, bad marking. And then the other thing is everything is correct and you just might be examined because of the 30% rule. U.S. Customs has to do and examine 30% of the containers that come into the United States. Another thing that could help you prevent an exam in ocean freight, besides getting a reputable U.S. Customs broker that'll look over your documents and make sure your markings are correct on your box, but also having a continuous bond versus a single entry bond. This gets you known by the U.S. government as being an importer. This gets you known as being a person who supports the U.S. economy. If you have a continuous bond, it's a 12-month continuous bond. So it's not January to December. It's whenever, if you started it now, it would be May to April. So that has a flat fee, and you can import as many times as you want on that bond. And you get a number with U.S. Customs. Therefore, they see that you have interest and you're not going to be smuggling, drugs in the lining of your, zipper.
Okay, great.
The single entry bond is you buy per shipment.
Okay, great. Now, Pam, I think you just did a phenomenal job outlining sea shipping, the vision of it. So what I'd like to do is take a step back and dive deeper into a whole lot of those points that you just brought up there.
Okay.
So just to help out, because we may have people with various levels of sea shipping knowledge. So with air shipping, as you were talking about, you're charged based on the weight, but it's less just the weight itself, it's volumetric weight. So there's a minimum of whatever that
the chargeable weight is.
Yes. Exactly. They're going to charge you X amount of weight. So if I understand correctly, if you had a bunch of lampshades, which weren't stacking on each other and had a lot of space in between, versus if you were doing bricks, you might not have as much lightness, so to speak, of your lampshades versus the bricks because of how much space is eaten up. So
exactly, and the airline is not going to allow you to ship a big bulky lampshade for the same price. I mean, they're going to force you. They're going to force you to cost out that lampshade for the same price as that 2 by 6 inch brick.
Right.
And we always say, it's the cotton balls versus the marbles. They're both round, but look at the difference, Mm-hmm. So the airline is going to make sure that they get the same price from you for the big bulky shipment as this little bitty one. and that's called dimensional or chargeable weight, and that's where that comes in. And you've got to be careful, because a lot of suppliers that end up sending shipper routed, we call it, air freight for you on your behalf, will not always know about this. They're getting smarter, but there are always some people that you need to make sure know what the U.S. regulations are.
Okay, that makes sense. So the reason for the volumetric weight is, I think you're getting to, is that on a boat you have a lot more space, whereas on a airplane it's a little small cylindrical tube. Even if it's a big plane, it's still relatively small. And if it's a passenger jet, it's the small part down below. And if it's FedEx or UPS, it's a big plane and they got a lot of space, but it's still small. So they want to maximize that space, because they can only get so much back and forth at a time. So you're being charged volumetric weight, whereas with sea shipping, you're being charged based on just the space it takes up. It has nothing to do with weight. Did I understand that?
Right. So those cotton balls, I mean, if you can fit, 40 cotton balls, 40 packages or boxes of cotton balls into a carton, fine, and your carton's huge. And then if you fit 40 bricks into the same, into a space that's, a 13 by 13 by whatever, then the sea shipping doesn't matter, because it's gonna volumize its overall the 3,000 containers on that ship.
Okay, so when you were saying before, what you found oftentimes is 3-4 CBM cubic meters. So that would be essentially, if I remember correctly from 10th grade geometry, it would be the length times width times height. So it would be something along the lines of like 3 meters by 1 meter by 1 meter, the total space.
Yes, but in how I think of it, and I'm very, we've got a table out here that's about 2 cubic meters, and it's like, oh, great. I just look at the table. If you all think of it like this, a standard pallet that Amazon accepts, a 48 by 40 by 6 foot tall, 72 inches, that is 2 cubic meters.
Okay, so you'd be looking at it, the math makes sense once you get to about 1.5 pallets.
Yes. Okay. And that's why I say 3 or 4, because sometimes they don't always pack them just perfectly and all that. But that's where we're kind of thinking, because ocean freight is based on minimums, and that is what is so different with air freight. Air freight's chargeable weight. That's what it is. Bingo, you're done. Ocean freight has got minimums, so it's a minimum requirement. You have a minimum of moving the freight in and off the ship. Moving it in and off the dock, moving it from loose freight to palletized freight. All this kind of stuff inside and outside the port. Which we don't need to get into huge details of that, but there is a laundry list of charges that go with shipping by sea. It is not just ocean freight. And this is the other drawback that people get scared of, because they all of a sudden get a surprise. Usually when people talk about ocean freight, they're just sending ocean freight. Okay, you've got 3-4 CBMs of ocean freight, and now the supplier will just quote you for ocean freight, but yet there's destination charges that are based on these minimums that sometimes your supplier, or maybe an agent over there that's not familiar with U.S. government guidelines, they don't even know that it's $3 a CBM or a minimum of $75 to move it from palletized to unpalletized. There's that it's a minimum of $5 to use a forklift per 1 CBM. I mean, all these different things are itemized on this side. And they don't necessarily understand why, because on their side, it's kind of all lumped in. But on our side, the port that is union based, the port has got all these charges that we call destination charges. So it doesn't matter if you come from China, if you come from India, you come from Europe, whatever, you're going to have these port charges along with your ocean freight.
Okay, that makes sense. So just to kind of walk through that a little bit. So if let's say I have a product and I could do a spreadsheet where I just compare, okay, here's air shipping costs, here's what it costs for sea shipping. So if I'm doing my air shipping, let's say it's $2,500 for 1,000 units. I'm just kind of making that number.
Okay.
So it's not far off some of my products. So that's basically $2.50 per unit. So it's fairly straightforward on the air shipping side, because it's like you were mentioning, it's basically just volumetric weight times whatever the price is,
Right. It's real clean and clear. One line.
Exactly. But sea shipping, although it can be a little more confusing at first, sometimes the math makes sense because, as you were saying, you have more volume, so you're kind of spreading some of those costs are. So there's the volume CBM charges to get from point A to point B across the ocean, and then you also have all these other charges once you get to the port. And as you were saying, a lot of them are minimums, or they're kind of set prices. So it's almost like you have fixed costs. So
yes,
if you add up all those costs, you can just say, okay, how many units do I have, and divide it by that. So in order to get to that, okay, this is what I'm going to pay approximately to get across the ocean. What are some of those charges besides just the physical boat that people should be looking at? Like, what are the big ones, so to speak? I know there's a lot of them. We don't have to go into all
right. I would say the big ones are going to be your what I call the destination charges that include all these things. The labor of moving it, the unionized labor of moving your freight off of the boat into, if you want to call the port, a big old concrete slab.
Right.
I mean, kind of get a visual, you got your boat, now we got a crane operator that's taking it and just putting it on the concrete. Well, now how do we get it from, now you and your 4 or 5 buddies are in this, in this container. Now what do we do? Well, now we've got to break down the container in the CFS, which is a container freight station. And what they'll do is they'll divide that container up 3 or 4 different ways, however many people are in that shipment. And that being said, the paperwork goes on top of them. And also, due to theft, and it's a benefit really to you all now, is that the CFS will palletize that loose freight that comes off the container. So your 1,000 cartons will be able to be palletized, and you'll have the label on top, or your packing list and your information on top of your 1,000 cartons, and it will be palletized. Now, will they do a good job of it? Will Amazon accept that palletization? Probably not. Therefore, that's why it needs to go into a warehouse on the state side and actually be presentable for Amazon.
Okay.
That's the next big thing that people don't understand.
And CFS is
Container Freight Station.
Freight Station. Okay, so that's somebody who's taking it off the boat from the container and putting it
right,
something that can go in a truck or something, right?
Right, and dividing out all the cartons in that container. So you and your new best friends, or you and your friends that are going to be divided out. Their freight is going to be divided out, and it's going to be separated. And you want that anyways, because you may not use the same warehouse that your buddy does. I mean, just because you love them on the container doesn't mean you got to end it all the way through. So from that point, I would say the next highest pricing that you have to understand and realize that there's a cost of doing business is this secondary warehousing. Now, as you know, the Amazon warehousing has increased in volume and so forth. So this has kind of been a blessing in disguise that we've ended up having these warehouses along the United States for this secondary stopping point. Because now we've asked them, can you store it for a cheaper, for a cheaper price than leaving it in Amazon? So let's just go back a second. All right, it's off the container. You and your four other fellows are divided out. You've got your freight, your 1,000 cartons coming to our warehouse.
Mm-hmm.
That we have to get a trucker, and we'll bring it from the port to our warehouse. At that point in time, you can make your shipping plan, or you can decide what e-commerce platform you want to go through, and you can tell us, say, look, I want to send 200 of these cartons to my my brick and mortar store, in Dallas.
Mm-hmm.
No problem. We'll unpalletize them. We'll get them shipped out. You have a choice of sending it LTL, which is less than trailer load. You don't have to buy a whole truck to get it there. Or we can send it UPS or FedEx, however you prefer. The other part, you might store 500 and for a cheaper price and just replenish from that warehouse. And then the other part, what is that? That's 700. So the 300 you're going to send to Amazon. And you want to send these on Amazon approved pallets. So the warehouse needs to know what Amazon wants. Mm-hmm. There's, 1 inch overhang. It's 1 inch total, not 1 inch on all four sides. It's 1 inch total. The FBA has to be current and there if you're going to palletize it and send it on a truck. But if you wanted to send it by UPS, your FBA label still has to be on there, but then we'll send the SPD, or we'll place the SPD UPS FedEx label on SPD, it right there.
I know what SPD is, but just for those that aren't sure what SPD means.
It is what is it? Help me.
Small
package, package delivery. I was thinking standardized in my head.
So it would be like the FedEx, the UPS, DHL,
right?
Somebody like that. So
right.
Just to take a step back, with air shipping, the mentality of someone who does air shipping is their boxes have labels on them, whether it be a FedEx label or UPS label, whatever. It goes into a plane just like their luggage does. It's scanned. Right. And then they put it on a truck and it just goes. So it just kind of happens. Whereas with sea shipping, you're going into these containers within the ship. So it's not just one big storage hold like an airplane is. It's your stuff. It has to be more organized because it's hundreds of 40-foot long containers, and within that boat you have to have those containers, and then within the container you have to have multiple people, because you could either buy the whole container or you could buy space within it. So like you were saying, you got new friends or your own friends. So logistically, for a lot of people, it's probably going to end up being they're going to share a container with people they don't know.
Yes, that's usually what happens.
Yes, unless you're lucky that you have a few of your friends that you do know who have shipments going out around the same time from the same port. So
right.
What I'd like to do is just take a step back too and refer back to your awesome chart here and kind of just go through the life of a sea shipment, because I think that'll help put a lot of the really good information you've shared here into more context. So I'm looking at your chart, and I start off with the order, and I approve the order from the factory. They put it into boxes, and you've got on here, it goes through inspection and must clear Chinese customs is like the first couple steps. So how does it go from the factory to the port? Is there a difference in who sometimes manages that and who is
Yes,
responsible?
yes, that's a good question, because it depends on, once again, your freight forwarder.
Okay.
Will your freight forwarder handle this, or do you need to get an agent on your own? And we call it an agent, but it's a representative in China. We'll use China because that's where most people import from. Do you need a representative in China that handles it them yourself? So are you, trying to get somebody to move it by yourself? Is your freight forwarder already got connections, or does your supplier already have connections to bring it to the port?
Okay.
That being said, now there's a timing issue on ocean freight that is the supplier's responsibility, and that is it's called ISF. You don't have this in air freight, but
Okay.
in ocean freight, it's called import security filing. And you as the importer have to notify U.S. Customs that you are importing your product 48 hours ahead of time.
You mean
Now,
before the boat leaves the port?
before, right.
Okay.
Okay, so, and some people say 72 to give themselves a little, but the requirement is 48. Now,
Sure.
are you running around like mad saying, hey, Mr. Steamship Line, I got this freight, I got this product? No, no,
Right.
no, no, no. It's just like your question before. Does your freight forwarder have connections so that they can manage this? Does your supplier and your freight forwarder talk so that the supplier fills it out and the freight forwarder submits it? You can submit the ISF if you want. I am not a fan of that. I do have one customer that does. But if you have an error, it is $10,000, and it's on the importer of record. It's not on the supplier. It's not on the broker. It is out of your pocket.
Right.
And that is per occurrence. So what if you put the wrong exporting port from China? What if you had the wrong province? What if you had kilos written rather than CBM because you're used to always sending air freight?
Right.
That's $20,000 right there. So be very, very careful on what you can do by yourself, and is it a smart decision?
Okay. Now, some of the reason that people are doing some of these things is, from my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, is if if you're in the mentality of doing air shipping, your your invoice from the supplier typically says EXW or FOB, and usually you don't care because it doesn't make a difference to you because the stuff still arrives, and it just
Right.
happens because
It's all in, we call it. It's
right,
all in.
exactly.
It's
So
great. It's a miracle.
so there is a difference in sea shipping between EXW and FOB. So do you mind just taking a step back and explaining the difference between the
Sure.
two? Because I think in sea shipping, it makes a lot more difference. And then that also starts getting into, like, the paperwork and stuff like that.
Right. And whose responsibility? Exactly. In X Works, that means that the product comes from your supplier, and it's your financial responsibility to get it to the exporting port.
Okay.
All right. In FOB, if your commercial invoice said FOB, that would be the supplier's responsibility to get it to the exporting port in what we call the ship.
Right.
And so it is a huge difference in cost of the product, and also the financial responsibility and the timing. So you need to be very careful. I always encourage my people to ask for an Ex Works pricing and an FOB pricing for their product, because we all know that if you buy something FOB from a supplier, they're including that in the price of your product.
Right.
So is it 3 cents, or is it $1.33 per item? but you don't know unless you ask, right?
Right.
So it's just one of these things that we always, when we talk to everybody and we try to make them see the bigger picture, to see what we can do and what they can do to minimize the costs.
Okay. So whether the supplier pays for the stuff to get onto a truck to the port, or basically you are paying for it. So you as the supplier, if it's X Works, that means really if you're working with a freight forwarder like HYC, they're taking care of that.
Right.
So it's just who's responsible for the truck, which is good to know, which is why they have these INCO terms, FOB, EXW, whatever. So then it gets to the port. And so if anyone who's ever been on a cruise ship, they know that boat's leaving. It doesn't matter if it's ready if you're ready to be on that or not. So if you're at, the beach and it's leaving, you could be in the Bahamas for a while, So it's kind of the same thing too here. So the difference is you're just maybe taking a taxi to go from seeing the stingrays to going to the port to get on the cruise ship, to here it's going from a factory, not just ready to walk on board. It has to go through basically the customs in China, right? Because they
Right.
still have the ability to say this goes out or what doesn't go out. So is there anything that holds stuff up with Chinese customs on the way out of the country?
Yes, and it is amazing to me how many people import that don't know that there is a Chinese customs regulations that they go through prior to it getting here. They always talk about the U.S. customs being the big bad boys, whatever.
Right.
Well, China customs can be too. I mean, if they don't feel that it is marked properly on their documentation, if they feel that the pricing, it's similar to us. I mean, if they feel like the documentation is not proper, if the weight's not proper, they can hold it. If they think that you're importing, ceramic cups, and your box does not, and nor does your carton reflect that labeling, they'll hold it for that. They'll question the ability. MSDS, if you've got something that's FDA, they'll hold it for that.
Material safety stuff, right?
Data sheet, right?
Data sheet.
Material
Okay.
safety data sheet. And the biggest thing on that one that held up so many of them is, you remember the wave of incense oils, the lavender,
yes.
and all that. Well, that was a big deal with both customs. One of the flavors, for lack of a better word, was hazmat, and it was either lemon or lavender. I think it was lavender, but who would have thought that lavender would be hazmat, but raspberry, China berry, whatever wouldn't be. I mean, what was the big difference, right? Well, they would pull those all the time. And then they pulled their data sheet on it, and or they didn't have the FDA like China wanted. So it kind of just depends. I mean, what you're importing to see if it flows nicely. I used to import for one customer granite, and it was containers and so forth, but it was granite. And it got held all the time because my customer would load it. He would put the weight of the container, and the Chinese government would say, no, that container weighs more, and move it aside. And it sat for a week or two until we got the right documents, the right weight.
Right.
Then we had to pay to reweigh it. We had to pay, to bring it back to the warehouse so that they could, get it right and get their documents according to what China customs wanted.
Okay, and that makes sense, because at the end of the day, they're a sovereign country, and they can say they want to make sure whatever standards they have and laws they have, that it's going out. Now, typically, you're not necessarily paying charges on the way out, correct?
Right. Normally, you don't. We have had some exams that have been paid, that have been on the China side that have had to be paid. And that usually is worked out between your supplier and you, because it's something that was not covered in what you believed was the proper way. Like, going back to the weight. I mean, you wouldn't know how much that container weighed. You were relying on your supplier to, put the proper weight on it.
Right.
So then that would be worked out if there was a fine or anything, that would be worked out between you two. But of course, some company like HYC, we could get involved in it and discuss and on the behalf why they should pay it based on and not you, and so forth. Now on the USA side, it's pretty much all you. I mean, importer of record is responsible. The regulations clearly say don't be an importer of record if you are not familiar with the terms and regulations of importing. That type of information is written all over every federal document.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
They don't miss that.
Right. So let's take a step back from before it gets to the port in the U.S. It's going across the ocean. And if, let's say, it's going from Shanghai to Los Angeles, that's about a 15, 20-day trip.
Right. And it depends on the ship, of course. I mean, some of them can make it in 13 days, but then it's usually a higher price because we consider that a really fast vessel.
Right.
15 to 18 is the most common. It's still a direct, to Los Angeles. You don't want it. It's not going to be transshipped, which means your container actually moves to another ship. It won't do that. So that being said, it's a pretty normal 15 to 20 day. And then don't forget the typhoon season either. Sometimes the ships have to go up a little bit, hang out there, and then come back down. So that it's
kind of going around this.
Yes. So it takes a little longer. It's kind of like just having a traffic jam in the city. I mean,
right.
Rather than your straight route, you kind of detour through the neighborhoods and then come back in and around.
Okay, that's good. So, all right. So, and that's assuming it's going from, basically east coast of China to west coast of U.S. Like the one I did, it was, we went to Port of Miami because I'm on the East Coast. Now it went through, I think, the Panama Canal,
right,
and go back up. So then that added,
right.
I think a couple weeks onto it.
We call that all water.
Right.
Now, see, that was all water, and let's just take your shipment. We had an option of two ways to do that. We could send it all water from China to Miami, and it's usually a longer time period for that. We're I'm going to say around 34 40 days. And a lot of times the all water will not be direct. It will maybe stop in Houston and drop off some there, and then Mobile, now that it's getting to be a bigger one, maybe New Orleans, and then come on over to Miami, and swoop around that way. Or it could go on the other side and go New York, Wilmington. Usually it's New York, Savannah, and then it goes to Miami. It doesn't drop off to too many of them like Charleston and Wilmington and all that.
Okay.
So that's considered all water, and that why it takes longer is because of these stops, but also because you're not going on a faster way, which is MLB, mini land bridge. All right. We could have taken your same shipment, brought it to the LA California port, and then put it on a rail, and we could have railroaded it all the way through to Miami. Now, that may take 14 days or whatever, but say you've got a 15-day boat time, sailing time, and 14 days of the rail, you're still ahead of that 40-day, 45-day, whatever, all water.
Getting an extra 10 days out of it.
Right. So, and that's more expensive than all water.
Hmm.
because you're moving it faster and so forth. And so we could have had the option of that if you were in a rush for it. So it's always good to tell your freight forwarder your timeline so that they can prepare and plan ahead too. I want to preface, there's something that you need to keep in mind, how the price goes. If you stay on the water, that's the cheapest.
Okay.
Then you go into the rail, that's the next most expensive, and
Okay.
then the trucking.
Okay.
So we could have trucked it from LA to Miami, and that would have been $10,000 or whatever, some astronomical, because you also have to return that container when you truck. So we would have had to return the empty all the way back to LA.
Oh, okay.
So that's
Okay.
why it makes it the most expensive. So it's sea, rail, and truck. And if you can keep the trucking to the minimal, you'll end up pretty good on the cost wise. But
Okay.
that's how the dollars go. Sea is the cheapest, rail is the second, and trucking is the most expensive.
Okay. So it gets to the port, but before it goes onto a truck or to the railroad cars, uh, it's got to clear customs in the U.S. And that's where it's more important because you're going to have charges. They're probably paying, this is just my perception there, but they're going to be paying more attention to what's coming into the country than another country would focus on what's going out. Is that a fair
Exactly.
assumption? Because they're worried
Exactly.
about drugs and is it safe and things like that. Does that, so they're going to look at the paperwork more, and you also have charges that are dependent on um, the codes that you use. So
Right.
what are they looking for, and what are some pitfalls to avoid getting into the US?
Getting into it, I would say the first thing, and this has kind of been the buzz around everywhere, is trademark. All right.
Mm,
Um, the Dirt Devil trademark issue, whatever.
okay,
Uh,
I'm not familiar.
we had somebody import something. It did not have the Dirt Devil name. It didn't have whatever, all that. Well, we had a U.S. Customs guy that back in the day, he knew that model from Hoover and blah 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 blah, and of all crazy things, these little vacuums
Okay,
were
like the
seized.
handheld.
Yes, yes.
Huh.
But we just happened to have a U.S. Customs officer that was old enough to even and had a good enough memory to realize when they opened it up for inspection that he has seen that before, and he knew that particular model was not made anymore by Hoover, and
Uh-huh.
it was part of an LCL, less than container load shipment. So
Okay.
this is one of your new friends that you're thinking, oh man, why didn't you take care of this? I got to move my freight, and I'm here in now a trademark issue. Well, your freight forwarder, if you've got a good one, and a U.S. Customs broker can work together on this. And you can't push customs to do anything they don't want to do, but you can hopefully get an empathetic one that says, okay, can we put this aside? It's going to take a long time for a trademark issue to be settled. Can we release the other freight? Like I said, I've been doing this 34 years. That is the only time they have ever made a difference for that. And they let a container go, the LCL container be divided up, get into the port, and be processed for U.S. Customs, leaving the trademark party over there in seizure.
Okay.
And it
So
sat there for 18 months. So glad you did, glad. But it took a
yeah,
lot of work for my
sure.
compliance guy to even get that part in there. So that would be something that would be kind of a pitfall on that.
Okay. So basically, just to reiterate this, you have a box that's 40 feet long, essentially. It's a big metal box, and you're putting stuff in there because about how many pallets fit into a container?
Well, 10 fit into a 20, so about 20 plus some cartons into a 40.
Okay, so let's say you have 2, 3 pallets of stuff. that means if everyone else has 2-3 pallets of stuff, you've got about 5-6 other people in there with you. And so from what you're saying is if there's something wrong with one, it's holding up everybody in that container. Did I just understand that right? Okay.
Exactly. You understand that perfectly correct. And I mentioned that before, but I think it's important to mention it again and also give an example of how important it is that your U.S. broker and compliance manager is on this side. Because your freight would have been held up for 18 months too. If you didn't have someone working day and night, you know, trying to, but not pushing. We don't push U.S. Customs. We're just kindly asking, you know, for
like
their
when
help.
you go to the DMV, you can only push so hard.
Exactly.
Ask gently.
Exactly. Right. And you can only call U.S. Customs one time a week. You cannot just dial their number.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. There's all sorts of rules on that. So you need somebody that's supportive on this side.
Right.
The other, you were asking other issues and so forth. Made in China. That has been one of the big things that if you do not have made in China or made in Philippines or wherever on your individual product.
Okay.
Or box that if it was going to sit on the shelf, that could cause problems. I encourage the markings on the outside of the carton to go ahead and have made in China put on it anyways. Let's just cut to the chase. Let's just give the U.S. Customs what they want.
Okay.
You know, so along with maybe the PO number or some code that you've got, how this is one carton of 40, 2 cartons of 40, 3 cartons of 40. We also go ahead and encourage made in China just be printed on as part of the markings.
Okay. So when you say markings, because with air shipping, a lot of times they take cardboard and they just throw it together around your stuff and they call it a carton. And there's nothing on it other than maybe a label and some other stickers. But with sea shipping, there's like labels that have to do with, it's the factory, right?
Right. The factory will put the markings on the carton for you. And the factory will also, do a lot. If you ask them, they'll put the made in China on the individual box, or maybe a little sticker for the individual box where they have, where the origin is. That is a mandate, and they're very, very particular on that. So we always, we kind of go over and beyond because we don't really want any trouble. And if they're going to print one thing, hey, just put made in China. They're probably proud of it anyways. You know?
Exactly. There's no sense hiding it.
Right.
All right. So let's say Customs, they pull out there. I'm assuming there's an actual rubber stamp or something where they stamp accepted or something along those lines, and it now moves in the process to transport it to warehouses. So somebody has to take it off the container because it's still in the container at this point, right?
That's the port that does that. Those destination charges. So
you're being charged. So that's some of those fixed fees. Is that
right? That's kind of done behind the scenes, and that's just part of the process. That I don't tell so and so to go pull that container and get it unloaded. It is just done in a systematic way according to their port.
Okay, so then
now we're traveling from the port to the warehouse.
Okay, and the warehouse could be Amazon at this point, or it could be a freight forwarder. It could be an in between. Where's it going?
All right, we actually have got somebody looking into this for me for full containers going directly to Amazon. But let me just tell you, on Seller Central, there's 15 pages of discouragement of doing that. But
I would avoid it. I don't even do my air shipping going straight to Amazon.
Yeah, it makes makes you liable for container detention, demurrage. If they don't get you in and out,
Yeah.
you're going to be paying a lot of fees per day for holding that out. All right, so we're going to assume we're going to do it. We're going to do it the systematic way, because we're going to import more than we're going to put into Amazon anyways.
Right.
That's where you should, this is where sea shipping really is the plus. Is you're gonna start increasing your shipment, so you're gonna get it a better deal from your China supplier,
Right.
and you're gonna bring it in. You're gonna bring in 2,000 units this time. So so when it comes to the warehouse, we arrange for it to come from the port to the warehouse. That's HYC's responsibility to, and part of the package of doing business. I mean, it's not going to help you if it doesn't get to the warehouse. We get a trucker. We arrange for a trucker. There are certain truckers that are allowed on the port and not. There are certain truckers that charge you an astronomical fee if they have to wait in line. So we have agreements with, and so should other people have agreements with truckers that know they're going to sit there for a few hours, but then also will do business because they're picking up multiple shipments, and they know what window to go to and so forth at the port. So we've now got it loaded in, unloading into our warehouse. Well, remember, it came into that container as loose freight. The CFS, when it got unloaded at the port, palletized it any which way they could, any size pallet they wanted, shape, and all that.
Their own personal standards.
Exactly.
Okay.
So now we're unloading at the warehouse this sloppy pallet, and we're bringing it in. And we're saying, okay, Kevin's got, his 2,000 cartons here, and we've got that, and we'll check it in and all that. Now you may want to do an inspection of just a visual. We call it a general inspection. Are the cartons, have they been run over by a forklift at, the CFS? Are they damaged? Have they stacked too many? And the weight of your cartons have smushed the bottom two layers, because China is not known for using very durable cartons in shipping.
Not at all.
So if you've got heavy product, and the CFS stacks at 7 high, the weight of the, probably the 6th and 7th row is smashing 1 and 2. So you might want to have the warehouse look at those, because it would be possible damage. Okay. And then you'd go back to your supplier and say, look, we take pictures, and we'd say, look, through no fault of my own, it was how, how heavy the product is, and you were not realizing that they were going to be stacked so high. We get them into the warehouse. We analyze it for you. We can inspect it. We personally have different warehouses that do different things. We've got in LA, it's more of a churn and burn type. You store, you put an FBA label on it, or a UPS, small, the SPD, the small package. In Memphis or Huntsville, or even in Tampa, we've got one that, they can see if the
HYC's
affiliated warehouses.
Okay.
Yes. Those will be like if you need to make sure if something's crushed, or if the eyes on the doll are perfect, or anything is damaged. If you had a gift box and they were smashed, those would be the ones that would take care of something we call detailed inspection then.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, perfect. So basically, now we've gone from the port to an in-between, whether it's somebody who's just taking the boxes and putting on an Amazon label, because you have to have that Amazon label for them to accept it. So now, if let's say you do your detailed inspection, you're now going to do the trucking to the final destination, which could either be to Amazon, or to a 3PL, or to whoever, or you guys
Right. Or even to yourself. You may be one of those that, you want to touch, feel, look, you want to bundle it yourself with something else. Right. So the option's always there for that.
Okay. And that's a very good point. And I'm one of those that loves to touch. Probably too much of a control freak, and I'm trying to take myself out of some of that. Um, but okay, so then it gets to Amazon, and at that point it's being sold. And now I think the takeaway here is that all these things probably are happening in the background with air shipping. Is that a fair statement?
That is true. That is true. There, whether you've got a terminal or a CFS, container freight station,
Right.
you still have to unload it. You still put it, together. You still got to
Right.
put your documents. So it's very similar. From the airport, it's got to get somewhere.
Right.
Does it get to a main terminal where everything is put, into a big terminal and then put on, brown trucks, from that point and shipped out, so it's very, very similar. You just don't see it. And it also happens so fast in air freight. People really, it's here before you even think about, oh, how did it get here? But
Yeah.
ocean freight takes a longer time, so you're kind of in that 20 or 40 days, whatever, however you choose, you kind of get thinking about, oh, how's this going to happen? Oh, what's this going to happen? And it's just human nature.
And part of it too is I think it's faster in airlines, not just because the airplane goes faster than a boat, but also it's really one entity that's handling all that. So let's say it's FedEx going from Shanghai to West Palm Beach, let's just say, they're handling the whole process. So even if they're outsourcing the actual space on American Airlines, which they do that, right?
Yes, they do.
So then they're still managing the whole process. So they have a process for everything. Whereas with sea shipping, there's a whole lot more hands in the pot.
Exactly. Right.
So that's
Because
why you want somebody to kind of oversee all that.
exactly. And perfectly said. In fact, I'm going to steal that from you.
Please do. It's not trademark, so you can go ahead and use that.
But that is very, very true, because a steamship line doesn't own a trucking service.
Right.
you know, and it sure doesn't own a less than container, a smaller trucking service. I mean, they might send some full containers somewhere. You'll see Evergreen on the side of a container, and you'll see Evergreen Shipping Line. But for what we're talking about, the gradual growth of moving from air to ocean, you wouldn't be involved in that.
Yeah. So it's kind of similar to when I was in the event business. So there was like, if you had, let's say we called it off premise. So let's say you had an event at somewhere, a park, and you had a caterer, and you had somebody come in like a florist that brought like decorations and flowers, and you had a DJ, and you had someone else, and you had all these components that are all these separate vendors that they kind of work together, but they kind of don't. So somebody has to kind of oversee the whole thing. Or you
Right.
can just do that yourself, but it can be a little overwhelming, especially if it's a big event. Whereas when I was in a hotel, or actually I'll even backtrack it for a second to make it more relevant to my other example. Let's say when I was at Walt Disney World, we would just handle everything. So everything is controlled. So Walt Disney World was almost kind of more like FedEx, whereas like handling something off premises was more kind of like sea shipping. So you guys are almost kind of like the event planner, so to speak.
Right.
Does that make sense? Okay.
Right. The coordinator,
Mhm.
exactly, would, and that's not to say that you need to know all these parts when you're
Right.
doing ocean. That's what, everyone says, oh, there's so much to it, and the anxiety that goes with with ocean. Well, if you've got a good freight forwarder and a U.S. Customs broker, and in our case, we also are an MC truck broker, you've got the all-in-one right here. All you've got to do is talk to one person. They take care of it from point A to B, exactly like an event. I mean, we go to Live at the Garden here. Well,
Right.
I don't bring my own chair. I don't know the sound. I don't know the screen. All I know is I
Right.
come and I sit down and I enjoy an evening outside, and somebody else is taking care of it all. I mean, I paid for
Exactly.
my ticket,
Exactly.
but
Exactly. Okay, that's a very good thing. So, so you've got in that package with this, you've also got this that you had sent me, which a lot of the questions to ask. So the good news is, like, sea shipping can be overwhelming, and it's scary to think about like getting $10,000 charges to the US, but whether it's HYC or somebody else, like a good reputable freight forwarder should make it so you're almost like being struck by lightning and having that happen. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, yes, and they should be overseeing now because that ISF is $10,000 and it's your responsibility. I have three checkpoints. I have a manual, I have an electronic, and then I have an ISF. It's an online system to the government that spits out their report. So we have two inside and an outside source that makes sure that your ISF matches with what the steamship line says, which is what the government says. Now, one of the things I do want to go back to and why using a warehouse in the middle, like from getting it from the port to the warehouse and then to Amazon.
Okay.
In LTL shipping, and this is different than air freight because air freight usually comes loose. So you just show up on Amazon's door, they open the door gladly. Oh, you're here. I've been waiting all day for your carton, All right, there we go. Well, with LTL, which is the most cost-effective way to send multiple and larger shipments to Amazon, that's less than trailer load. So we're going to put 2 pallets on a trailer, on a truck, and then we're going to send it to Amazon. Well, that trucker needs to be approved by Amazon and also have an appointment. And yes, and the appointments at times are 2 weeks out if Amazon's really busy. Like during the holidays, I mean, they could even be 3 weeks out. So don't expect that to be a quick turnaround. Once it gets into the warehouse, then Amazon is gonna see it within 72 hours. No, because you're gonna send more product to Amazon, and Amazon's going to stage that, and that's what they do with all these appointments. Now you can use HYC LTL or even Amazon LTL. It is the same principle.
Okay.
An appointment has to be made, and they will wait. They will wait until the appointment's made. The trucker has to fill out a certain part of the Amazon ruling. If you use Amazon LTL, you are the dispatcher. That means that you need to supply the information to Amazon and the Amazon trucker.
Okay. And the reason you would do that is because SPD, you're only handling, X number of boxes, but because sea shipping, you would need to do larger shipments in order to make the economics work. So the economics of larger shipments is LTL is more cost effective than SPD. Is that right?
Exactly. And that's perfect because and as we stated at the beginning, all right, you're growing from air to ocean. Well, you're only doing that because your product is growing too. Your sales are growing. So now you need to grow. The other parts need to grow with you. Okay. And you need to make sure that your freight forwarder and U.S. Customs broker knows what are the requirements of Amazon, because we have helped many of them out when they thought they knew and they didn't. And it's the trucker that ends up going, what am I supposed to do? Well, if you're the dispatcher, you need to know what you're supposed to do. If not, hire someone that knows how to do it. The Amazon LTL is good and it's cost effective, but only if you know what you're doing. If you end up sending a trucker to like my location here, okay, I don't have your freight here. I'm in an office building. Right. So, but that's the only HYC that they've ever thought about. Oh, okay. Because that's where they sent their check. That's where or their payment. That's where their documents went from. All that. So that is not necessarily where your product is. Okay. So it's very, very important because they'll charge you a dry run, and now all your good deal just got lost. I mean, you'll end up having to pay a trucker to turn back around. And
Okay.
we have to turn away three and four truckers. I mean, big old semis come in here to pick up some freight, and they've stopped going through the gate now. And it's like, okay, I know you don't have the freight. Can you just tell me where it is? But we can't do that because we have to go back through, or you all have to go back through the Amazon Seller Central and correct your location.
Oh, okay.
Because the delivery order and all that you now have done because you're the dispatcher. So you need to make sure that that's very clear to you in the part that you read about being an Amazon LTL, dispatcher.
So as much as I love trying to figure out all these pieces of the puzzle, it definitely sounds like it makes more sense, especially starting off in sea shipping, not to put all those kind of self-service things. So one of the good things is when the one sea shipment I did do where I worked with your team, it was very well laid out of exactly what the costs were, and I didn't have any surprise charges at the end. So that was a good thing. And I would say if someone is thinking about doing sea shipping, they might as well at least get quotes. I mean, you could get quotes from whoever else they've thought of, but you've shared so much information. You definitely have a passion for all this stuff, and you've been doing it since you were 2.
Yes, a babe in the woods.
You're just a little babe in the woods out there working on containers. So I would definitely say if somebody's thinking about doing sea shipping, is there a way they can get a hold of you?
Yes, I have gotten together an Amazon team, and their email is ateam, ATEAM, at hyclogistics.com. And that is a group that is very familiar with e-commerce and Amazon ways, and they will be able to help you. They've been doing this now. We started branching out. I divided the company 5 years ago, and these girls have been here 4.5 years. Okay. So they have, and I should say, we have one guy on the team. We have girls and one guy.
Right.
So the girl and the guy.
Equal opportunity. All right, good deal. So if somebody wasn't sure if their shipment was going to make sense to do sea or air, could they help with both?
Oh, sure. And we do this all the time. And this is part of what I feel like makes someone be a smart importer. Give us a call, send us the email, go on our website, put the quote in. We'll actually make a quote, and then we'll say, and I also did one for C, and I'll show you how it looks. And then if, dialogue gets going and it's more advantageous to stay in the C shipping, then you might want to up your cartons by, 10 or 20 if you can financially do that. And they'll show you how really the cost goes down and because of the minimums of sending it. But Lori and Sue are pros at doing that. Those are my 2 main ones, and they'll be happy to, even if you think of something and want to shoot them an email and call them up, question. They'll be happy to talk with you.
Okay, great. Well, I will also link to the email address you just mentioned, ateam@hyclogistics.com, as well as just the website for hyclogistics.com.
Thank you.
So
that'd be great.
Again, if anyone has questions, please feel free to reach out to Pam. Also, you can leave a comment down below if you have any questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. And I might even invite Pam into the comment section at some point.
Sure thing.
A lot of questions over time, because the good thing is, even if you're watching this, we're recording this in 2018, but if you're watching this in 2020 or beyond, a lot of the same stuff is still going to apply. And if anything's different, you can always ask the question. We'll do our best to give you the best possible answer. So thank you for watching this video, and thank you, Pam, for being here. I learned a lot.
Appreciate it.
Take care, everybody, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.